Good morning. We are on a stream today that is a tributary of the Tallapoosa River in Alabama. It is a stream I have not fished in probably 6 or 7 years. Native bass here are Alabama bass and Tallapoosa bass, the red eye that's found in the Tallapoosa Basin. But we picked this place for another reason too. This is an area where we detected a surprising amount of hybridization between the two native species, Alabama bass and Tallapoosa bass. Fish obviously do hybridize naturally, but it's normally at a very low incidence, maybe 1% or less. And what we were finding in streams like this were more like 30, 40, 50, or even 60 or more % of the fish were intergressed with each other. It's a very interesting question as to why something like that might happen. We'll be talking more about that as the day goes on. But in the meantime, here we are, ready to roll. And so sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join with us as we check this place out and see what we can find and learn today. And very first cast, what should my eyes see? But here is one of those aforementioned hybrids. Almost certainly, you can see it looks an awful lot like an Alabama bass, but it's got the eye crescent and the white tips on the fins, and other than that it doesn't really have a lot of red eye characters. Has a little bit of those iridescent scales up above the lateral stripe, but yeah, this is almost certainly one of those natural hybrids, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this as the day goes on. But this is certainly one of the fish. Second fish of the day is this really nice red breast sunfish. Very common fish in streams and rivers. Often one of the dominant sunfish species in these habitats, more so than say bluegill or red ears. So this is an interesting area here. This is the eastern edge of the Tallapoosa River Basin. And actually red breast sunfish are not native here. They're all over the basin, but they're not native here. I have no idea when they were put in here, but it was obviously a while ago. But if we moved just a short 20-25 miles east of here, we shift into the western edge of the Chattahoochee Basin, and there's red breast sunfish all over that too, but there they are native. We are right here on the edge of where this species becomes native to becoming not native. And interestingly, long-eared sunfish, which we very well might catch some today, they're the exact opposite. Here they're native, and over in the Chattahoochee where they are found, they are not native. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this fish. Really fun fish to catch, puts up a heck of a fight, big mouth, eats just about anything. But here, they're a non-native species. So here we are, not 5 minutes later. Here is what I would say is probably a pure Alabama bass. You notice that this looks a lot like the other fish, but there's no hint of white tips on the fins, no hint of an eye crescent. And so this is almost certainly a pure Alabama bass. And since it's in its native range, it's not a problem here, like it is in so many other parts of the southeast where this fish is not native. Right here at the very first drop, I've already caught 3 fish here. Here is another hybrid, and a lot bigger one than what we saw the first time. You can see the same kind of things here. We don't really have the white tips, notice, not so much on the tail, but the eye crescent is really obvious. This fish is kind of colored a little bit darker than some Alabama bass might be. But in general, this is a fish that it's hard to say what folks would call this if they caught this without knowing what was going on here. It definitely has a lot of red eye characters without the white tips on the fins. And to be fair, some of the bigger red eye bass, the white tips are less noticeable. But this fish literally does not have any. If you look real close, you can see there's basically nothing there. But that real dark spotting below the lateral stripe is more reminiscent of a red eye than it is an Alabama bass. But at any rate, this is definitely a one of those hybrids. And a lot of times folks who don't realize that this is going on, their first instinct is to call this a red eye, a big one. You know, oh, it's a trophy red eye. And you know, so red eyes grow a lot slower than Alabama bass, and so guess what, when they hybridize, their hybrids have a much higher size potential than the pure fish do. So a lot of times the bigger quote-unquote red eye bass are in fact hybrids, in most of the streams where this is going on anyway. So there we are. We're certainly seeing a lot of this already today here, just like it was the last time I fished here. Like I said, probably more than a half a decade ago. This is my fourth or fifth fish I've caught here, and here we have what I would probably consider to be a pure Tallapoosa bass. Notice that there's no real lateral stripe here whatsoever. There's some really faint blotches near the tail, but that's about it. Notice how much more prominent those iridescent scales are on the top of the fish. And obviously there's the white tip tail, fins, and a real strong eye crescent here. So this is definitely, I would say, a pure Tallapoosa bass. Now we have to keep in mind, when there's hybridization going on, it's impossible without genetics to know for sure if anything's really pure, because hybrids, quote unquote hybrids, we think of hybrids sometimes as just being a 50-50 mix, but it doesn't work that way. There are 50-50 mixes, but the problem is that then they back cross with pures, or they can cross with each other, and through time you get what we call more like a hybrid swarm, where you have pure fish, you have fish that are 90% one and 10 of the other, you have fish that are 90% of the other and 10% of the one, and then you have everything in between. And so sometimes hybrids can look a lot like either parental. So all you can do is the best you can. Here I would say this is a pure Tallapoosa bass, with the realization that this could still have hybrid or genes of Alabama bass in it too. Notice too how chunky this fish is for its size. That's more red eye-ish than Alabama bass. Alabama bass do get chunky, but usually not until they're over 2 pounds. When they're little fish like this, they'd be a little more streamlined than this guy is. That's another helpful characteristic when you're trying to look at a red eyes versus Alabama bass. So I'm gonna put this guy back, or let him get back. He really wants to go. Species number 4 today, long-eared sunfish. Like I said earlier, these guys are native to this basin. Just to our east, they would not be native in the Chattahoochee Basin, but they are here in the Tallapoosa Basin. Obviously one of the prettier sunfishes in North America. Very popular with the aquarium trade, which is probably one way that they get moved around, to be honest. And like other sunfishes, they're pretty easy to raise in tanks, as long as you keep them separated when they get this big, because they chase each other around. But yeah, very pretty animal. They bite a variety of lures. Interestingly, long-eared sunfish have recently been separated into multiple species. They are found really from basically around here all the way west into Texas and up to the Great Lakes, really a large part of the central part of the country. So they have been separated into, I think, 5 different species as of now, maybe 6, I can't remember exactly. And there is some differences for sure in the way they look. And I don't know what the fish here in the Tallapoosa River, I don't know what their new common name would be. But yeah, these are fish that you never forget when you catch them. Yeah. Another one of those Alabama bass, red eye bass hybrids. This one's a little more on the red eye side, but you can kind of see a really lack of any kind of blotches. It's got kind of a beginning of a lateral stripe near the back. It's long and thin, like an Alabama bass. No white tips at all on the fins, which a red eye bass of this size would certainly have. And again, you have the white or bluish white eye crescent. So this is another one of those natural hybrids that we see in this stream. Yep. So here we are, same place. This is a fish that might truly be a hybrid of some kind, but it certainly looks like a Tallapoosa bass. Again, unlike that last fish, notice it's got the white tips on the tail. You can kind of see it. I'll put it under the water in a second, you'll be able to see it better. And a really strong eye crescent right there. Just a little more of the iridescent scales up on top of the fish. I think, yeah, you can clearly see there the white tips on the tail. The other fish didn't have that. I've been talking about how chunky fish are, and if you notice, remember what the last one looked like? Notice how much more stout this fish is for its length. Again, that's more of a red eye versus the Alabama bass. And that's, when we're talking about that, I'm talking about Alabama bass under 12 inches. They tend to be really long and racy. Obviously, bigger fish start putting on weight and getting chunkier, but the little guys tend not to be that way. One of the reasons could very well be is that a red eye bass, actual pure red eye bass of this size, is probably 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and then an Alabama bass of this size is like 1 year old, and so they're just growing really fast, and they don't put on weight until they start slowing down. That's a typical growth pattern of a lot of bass. There seems to be no spatial separation between either species and the hybrids between them. You can get both species and their hybrids out of the same hole. And here you go, not 2 minutes later comes a pure Alabama bass out of the same hole. Again, this is just proof positive of what I was talking about earlier about how they don't have any spatial separation. You can get any one of them in the same place. So you can see this one's got, there's a little bit of shine on that eyeball, but it's not a true crescent. But turn it around and can kind of see. Obviously no tips on the fins. Just notice the coloration's totally different than that fish, the last two fish we had. And if you look at it again in the hand, notice how much longer and leaner the fish is at this age than that last one. Species number 5. Nice bluegill. Bluegill are really surprising where they'll show up. They're one of the most generalist of all the sunfish species. They're equally home in a small pond, in a small creek, in a reservoir, natural lake, found all over the eastern half of North America natively for a change. Anyway, really cool fish. It's really surprising how you can catch bluegill, nice bluegill, in a creek like this. There's another nice Alabama bass, about a pound probably. Again, if you look at how long and lean they are, if a red-eye bass got this big, it'd be a lot chunkier than this guy. This is right about where, above this, they start to put on some weight. But anyway, yep, another Alabama bass from this stream. So one thing we have to think about here is, what is hybridization? At its most basic level, what is hybridization? What does it mean? And if you boil it down to brass tacks, hybridization is a breakdown of reproductive barriers. So you have these distinct species of fish, let's just say, since that's what we're talking about today. And they've been here for a long time, and they have over the millennia, they have developed ways to not spawn with each other. Different seasons, different areas, whatever it is, visual recognition of your mate, of the same species, whatever it is, there's something that has kept you distinct. And so when you start hybridizing, that means that there's in some way, shape, or form a breakdown of reproductive barriers. Now, the one we talk about the most often here in black bass conservation is an artificial breakdown. That is, when you take a bass from population A and you move it to population B where that species wasn't found before, you immediately get hybridization in most cases. Pretty rampant hybridization. In that case, the reproductive barrier was isolation. Those two fish were never found together, and so therefore that was their barrier. But we break that barrier when we take fish from one place and move it to another. And so that is the most common way of breaking reproductive barriers, at least in fishes, for sure. But of course that doesn't happen here, right? These fish are both native here. So there is no geographic isolation reproductive barrier. It had to be something else. It had to be behavioral. It had to be habitat related. It had to be something. And we're not sure what it was, of course, because we probably don't know that in a lot of fish species, and certainly none of the ones that, like these bass, that haven't been studied hardly at all. But some way, shape, or form in this creek and others like it, the reproductive barriers have been broken, and you're starting to see a fair amount of hybridization here. I've probably caught 20 or 25 bass today, and I would guesstimate that 30 to 40% of them were hybrids. In a natural situation, you would expect it to be below 1%, like it would be a real oddball, and here it's commonplace. So in the Tallapoosa River Basin as a whole, it isn't a big problem. There's not a lot of populations like this one where that's a problem. I mean, ironically, one of them is the actual Tallapoosa River itself, where there's a lot of hybrids there. But there's a lot of streams that have a lot of pure populations in it, with no or almost no hybridization between the two natives. But if you get over west of here in the Cahaba Basin, or certainly the Black Warrior Basin, it's even higher than here. It's basically, some of these populations are 70% hybrids, or even all of them are hybrids. And you know, right now we're still in the I don't know exactly why this is going on phase. You know, like, we're really surprised. This is very unusual, and you name the animals, birds, mammals, whatever, it is very rare and unusual to have two species that co-evolve together to reproduce with each other, to hybridize with each other at a high rate like this. There could be anthropogenic influences here. Mankind could have somehow messed this up. There's certainly a lot of sediment in this stream, but a lot of the sediment's probably been here since the Civil War, based on some work that's been done over in Georgia. A lot of our sediment issues in these streams are really what we would call more legacy situations from really poor farming practices back in the 19th century. So it's hard to say. Of course, we don't know. For all we know, these fish have been hybridizing for that long. This is literally relatively recent since we've been looking at these fish, only in the last decade or so that we even started to care. So it's hard to know exactly why. I wish I had a better answer for you, but we really don't know. The other question is, what do you do about it, right? And, you know, so if you know that, like in Georgia and Tennessee and the Carolinas, where one fish got moved into the range of another fish, well, we know what the problem is. The problem was the moving. How do you fix it? Well, you can try to get rid of the non-natives. That's a real common thing, not just in bass, but trout management in a lot of places. A lot of things. Even exotic plant management is that way. Go remove the exotic plant. That's easy. I mean, one of them's clearly a bad guy, you know, the one that got moved in there, right? But over here, there is no bad guy. They're both native. So what do? You can't do anything there. Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has started investigating stocking, rearing and stocking these red-eye bass to try to swamp this issue. They've already started this in the Warrior Basin, and I think they're also starting to look at the Cahaba Basin. I don't think there's any reason to worry about it in the Tallapoosa Basin as a whole, because like I said, this is a rare situation. But if we're farther west, it's not so rare. But we're still in that not sure why it happened, and also not sure what to do about it. And the usual thing when you have something like that is destroy the exotic, get rid of the exotic. And here there is no exotic, and so it's an interesting situation. Regardless of the genetics of these fish, there's still plenty of them in here. Like I said, I probably caught 30 fish, and at least 20 of them were bass today in 3 hours. And honestly, I wasn't even fishing that hard. I've done better than that when I've really gotten serious about it. So these streams are still a hoot to fish regardless of the genetics. There's no real conservation risk of the species going extinct like we have over in the red eyes in Georgia, where there's a real concern and we got to do something. In the Warrior Basin in this state is that way too. So, you know, this is a rare case where we can catch a bunch of wacky bass and not really feel bad about it, if you will, because we know the Tallapoosa bass as a whole is on strong footing and steady ground. So I am about to head to the house today, get in before the rain that's coming this weekend shows up. But it's been a blast, and I'll tell you, creek fishing is an amazing thing. And I've fished in creeks all over, everywhere I've ever lived, starting in New Jersey. If you've never dipped your toe in a creek with a light action spinning rod and some kind of lure like a beetle, something as simple as a beetle spin, to see what's there, you'd be really surprised. I caught 5 species today of fish, 4 of them in the first 30 minutes of fishing. It's a hoot. You never know what's going to be on the end of your line, and you can catch some surprisingly big fish in these streams. So, anyway, until next time, tight lines.